Hey guys and gals, this is Alish from gainmedialab.com. Welcome to my exciting world of live audio mixing. If you have been following my channel for a while, then you will know that I'm a big supporter of keeping things simple. So in today's video, I will talk to you about managing the number of channels you have to deal with on the input side. If you want to know how I do it, stick around. Let's go! Let's face it, the number of channels we have to deal with on a daily basis is getting more and more ridiculous. The largest digital consoles allow us to have literally hundreds of channels that we have to manage during our live shows. And there are various approaches that you can take to make your life easier, such as grouping channels into mix buses or using DCA faders. Both of these approaches work great, and you should definitely find a workflow that works the best for you. But today I want to talk about managing the channel count at the source. So let's dive into my mental process for deciding what actually hits the inputs of my console. The first consideration will always have to be the sound. If you have a particular sound that you want to amplify through your PA system, you will have to either put a microphone in front of it or connect it through a DI box. The trick here is to determine what exactly it is that you are trying to amplify. For example, if you take a drum kit and a pop and rock genre, then each element of that kit will have to be amplified separately because we want to shape each element of that particular drum kit. But if you consider a jazz drum kit, then you might think of the entire drum kit as one sound source. So it doesn't make a lot of sense to put a lot of microphones on a single sound source because you might not even use them. That is why I usually tackle such a kit with just a pair of overheads and a kick drum mic, maybe add in a snare mic. When you consider how many microphones to use for a specific job, think in terms of how detailed are the elements of that sound source and what it is that you need to bring them out in the mix. That can immensely reduce the number of input channels you have to work with during the mixing process, without influencing the sound quality of your mix. The second thing to think about when deciding how many microphones to use for a specific live show is the proximity of those microphones to the same sound source. If you have a loud sound source being picked up by two microphones, then you will absolutely have to deal with bleed and phasing issues that occur between these two mics. If I know I can successfully adhere to the 3-2-1 rule and minimize the effect of phasing between microphones, then I have no issues with placing those microphones on stage. But if I know there will be a lot of bleed, I think hard about microphone positioning or even reducing the amount of microphones on the stage. This logic is particularly present when I'm dealing with orchestras and choirs, because the number of microphones for these large groups can quickly rise to unmanageable amounts. Sometimes using less microphones will actually mean a cleaner and punchier sound than when using more microphones with lots of bleed and phasing issues between them. So, what about using two microphones on one sound source, like on kicks, snares, and guitar cabinets? We commonly see engineers using two mics to achieve two different sounds that they can mix and blend together, and that usually works out fine because the number of these channels is quite limited to just a few sound sources, and it doesn't take a lot of time to check for phase issues by flipping polarity switches to see if there is loss in the low frequency spectrum. I sometimes use double microphones on kick drums, but with a slight twist. I would shape the sound of these two mics in such a way that I can use one of them for heavier beats and up-tempo songs and the other one for ballads and softer signals. On a digital console, however, you can try getting the same effect by duplicating the input channel and using different settings for different sounds, avoiding any phasing issues whatsoever. On guitar cabinets, I try avoiding using two microphones as a general rule. If it is a mono cabinet, then it just doesn't make sense to use two microphones to get a wider sound, because that is only achieved through some sort of phasing which will usually remove the clarity and the punchiness. If it is a stereo cabinet, then I might consider it, but I rarely decide to use it for live mixing. The reason for that is that I usually tend to mix mostly in mono, because I don't consider the PA system to be a stereo system as much as a set of boxes pointed at a particular section of the audience plane. Again, if you are looking for a wider sound, then you can try double patching the same input on a digital console and add chorus or some sort of a modulation effect to the second channel to get that particular sound. Remember, when you are removing inputs on stage, you're not only removing the microphones, but also mic stands and cables. You reduce the time needed for changeovers and minimize clutter on stage. The last thing I want to question is what we perceive as stereo sources by default. A keyboard with a stereo output, well, most of the times it just gets connected to a stereo DI box without actually thinking about the sound that it creates. But if you start thinking in terms of mono mixing, as I have talked about a few minutes ago, then that stereo image can sometimes be irrelevant and sometimes even damaging to your sonic image. For example, a piano sound from a keyboard will usually have the low frequencies distributed to the left side and the high frequencies distributed to the right side. But if you mix that sound in full stereo on your sound system, then half of your audiences will get a much darker sound and the other half a much brighter sound. In that case, it makes much more sense to provide the full sonic image of a keyboard for the entire audience by placing the keyboards in a much narrower stereo field. I'm not saying that you should mix everything completely in mono, but I want you to start thinking about every source in terms of its stereo width, even those that we consider stereo by default. In that way, you maybe get the chance to remove a few channels from your input list and still regain the full sonic spectrum of your live mixes. When we talk about channel counts on digital consoles, we tend to mostly think about the input section. But you have to be aware that you also have to deal with effect returns and mix buses, matrices, recording outputs, monitor mixes, and so on. So if there's any way you can reduce the number of channels you have to manage, you should seriously consider it. I hope my suggestions start a thought process that will allow you to do that quickly and efficiently. Let me know how you deal with managing input channels in the comment section. If you like this video, remember to like, subscribe and share, and you can also check out the website gainmedialab.com for even more content. That's it for today. Mix great shows and take care. Bye.